Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see a full house. It's such a privilege to be able to moderate this masterclass today with Nathan Crowley, a production designer whose work I've followed probably for 2 decades now, probably right back to when he did Insomnia with Christopher Nolan, the first of 8 movies he did with that amazing director. But he's done so much else as well. First Man, The Greatest Showman, Wonka, so many films that we're going to talk about today. We thought, first of all, we'd set the mood by showing a little taste of Nathan's work, so a little showreel. So we'll do that, and then we'll welcome Nathan to the stage. So if you can play the showreel, and then we'll be back.
There's no hiding from this, son. We have a job to do.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
The enemy tanks have stopped.
Why?
Why waste precious tanks when they can pick us off from the air like fish in a barrel?
There are 400,000 men on this beach.
You've changed things. Forever.
How does it feel when, there we go. How does it feel when you see a showreel like that?
It makes me feel old. No, it's fantastic. I still, it's a little Chris Nolan-esque, that one, because he actually made that for the Art Directors Guild.
Didn't include any of your other works, outrageously.
I mean, you know, he didn't have any of the other, anyway, it was very Chris. You know, it's this wonderful, I forget how much we did and how much we had to learn on the way to do it. And it's sort of been 2 decades of sort of learning how to make films year by year. So, yeah.
And I think that's what we want to talk about today is the very sort of, the very mysterious idea of what is production design. So we're going to sort of dive into that. But I think, first of all, I wanted to take you back to your beginnings. I think you were educated, is it Brighton Art School?
I was, yeah.
So when you went to Brighton Art School, what were your ideas of a career, if you even had any ideas at that point?
Well, I really, I didn't have any ideas. I did a year of fine art in London, and then I went to Brighton interior architecture, which is sort of all-in 3D design course, because I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew I loved design. My parents were in the field, so not in film. I had no idea that film even existed or could exist for art department. And so after college, I went to draft for architects in London, which was incredibly useful, but I didn't know at the time. It just seemed like a very dull job.
So you didn't have designs on being an architect as such?
My father was an architect, and my grandfather ran a big builder's merchants. My mum was a painter. So anyway, and then luckily Maggie Thatcher destroyed England, and Black Monday hit, and there were no jobs. So I went to LA, where I had a bunch of friends, and I thought, well, I'll just go to LA and see what happens. And I kind of, as a lot of people in my position, I just had a bit of fortune. I went into a bar on Melrose and bumped into a guy I was at art college with, who was drafting on a film called Hook, and they needed draftspeople because the union had run out. There was no one available, so
This is your moment of fortune, basically.
Massive fortune. I bumped into him in a bar. The next day I had an interview with Norman Garwood, who's the designer who did Brazil, Princess Bride, and he met me and he hired me. And so I was a draftsman. I didn't know a thing about film. I thought, well, I'm just going to, I better learn really quick. So yeah, I was incredibly lucky.
I mean, that was obviously a Spielberg movie. Did you get to meet him at any point, or?
Not really. I was called a junior draftsman. The only thing I did know was when you walk around Sony, which was the old MGMs, and they were building, Hook's ship that was the size of HMX Victory, and they were building a tank, and it seemed insane what they were doing, and the tank was leaking, there's water flooding, nothing was ready, and it was chaos. I kind of knew that these were my people, so I knew I was in the right place for the first time in my life. It's like, I need to make this work.
So did you know at that point what a production designer did? Did that become very clear early on? Even though you were far away from that at a career point?
Not really. I didn't realize the reason we're called production designers is because we have to design the production. And it has a lot more depth than just doing the design. We have to determine methodology. So I didn't really know that. I just knew I was into this kind of design. I knew that I wanted to try and step up to be an art director because I loved the process of building sets. There was very little CGI in those days, so we made everything. So we had plaster shops, wood shops, metal shops, and so graphic shops, we had set decks, scene stores. So it was just, it was sort of joyous, like being around those craftsmen. So I knew I wanted to be an art director, and I didn't want to sit at a drawing board. I wanted to be out there with the craftsmen, like making things.
So would you say, and if you define what an art director does, they're overseeing a whole team, basically, but they're underneath the production designer's umbrella, let's say?
Yeah, the art director has to take the designs, get them drafted, talk to construction, do budgets. I mean, the supervising art director it's a very managerial position, but he has to deal with accountants and schedules. I mean, our department can be absolutely enormous, and so you're running this sort of, we're here at the top of the arrowhead, and you're running, sometime on the last film we ran 1,000 construction guys, so you can, that kind of management and that kind of budget comes with its own problems because you have to manage that, and you really need a big team to spend that kind of money. So I guess I knew I wanted to build sets and design sets. I got to love story on the next film and really understand. The next film I did, which I'd never been credited for, was Bram Stoker's Dracula. I was on that for 11 months with second unit. Really, as the art director, I didn't get that credit or any credit, actually. But I was with Roman Coppola, and we did all the illusions in that film. So the puppeteering, the mirrored effects, the ghosting. And that was really my film school. So I would say working with second unit was my film school, and that's I still use those effects today.
But even if you look at Hook was sort of 1990, then by 95 you were on Braveheart as the art director. Now, that's not a small-scale production.
No.
And in 5 years, that seems like quite a huge leap.
Yeah, well, if there's any art department people here, you got to move quickly because you run out of years. So you got to go quick, and you got to learn and move quite quickly. Plus, I realized on Braveheart, after Braveheart, I wanted to be in charge, and that, I wanted to be in charge of the design. When I finally became a designer, I actually went back to the designer of Braveheart and apologized to him for not understanding the full scope of the job.
Right. But then I think you worked with John Carpenter, didn't you, on Escape from L.A.?
Yeah, but that was as a draftsman.
So you went back and forth, in other words?
Well, only for financial reasons.
Right.
You've got to get if you've got to work, you've got to work. So.
But this is what I find interesting about production design, is there doesn't seem to be one path to becoming a production designer. If you look at this festival, they're showing Jurassic World Dominion,
yeah.
And the production designer there, Kevin Jenkins, I think, he'd come from a VFX background.
Yeah, illustration, yeah.
Yeah, so there doesn't seem to be one direct path, or would that be accurate?
Yeah, very accurate. There's no one way. There's lots of methodologies. Like if you want to do CG, you can come from a CG background. There's plenty of different types of films. There's low budget, there's locations, there's stage builds, there's CGI driven, big fantasy stuff. So there's space really for lots of different paths. There's no real one path to be a designer, apart from imagination. You've got to be able to. I believe strongly that you have to be able to think in 3 dimensions. So that means you have to be able to imagine and shape in your head spaces and objects and change them as you go. So I think that's a very important part of design, is like that imagination ability. And I didn't realize till recently not everyone thinks in 3 dimensions. So. Because really, I've been working for Chris, and he does think in 3 dimensions. So it's a shorthand. Mm. So
I think by about 2000, you were on Mission Impossible 2 as well, which is again another enormous production. But presumably by that point, you were then looking to switch to being a full-blown production designer.
I had already designed. I'd already designed a couple of films. I'd already designed. I don't know if I'd done Behind Enemy Lines then, and we have the DP of Behind Enemy Lines here, Brendan. I'm not sure. I'd already started designing, but again, when you become a designer, all these sort of empty months where design jobs are hard to come by, so then you have to jump into art direction, and so you have to. It takes a long time to just continually do design. Mm. Yeah.
So we're going to jump into the idea of what is production design. I think we're going to use the clicker, the famed clicker, to bring up Interstellar.
I think we don't have.
We don't have the images. Oh well, we'll get to them in a minute when they come up.
There it is. This is the black hole.
This is the. Well, I think the interesting thing is, when are you brought into the process? How early? I know my association with Nathan goes back to. Oh, here we go. To Dunkirk, where I wrote a book on Dunkirk, and I was told in no uncertain terms, the first person you interview on this book is Nathan, because he's been there almost from the beginning. Obviously, Chris is writing the script, he starts the process, but he brought you on in all his films, I'm assuming, very early on. So, if we talk about Interstellar as a way, he brought you into that project.
Well, I'll go back a bit, because the reason we have this image here is because this is Chris's garage, and this is where it all started. So it's not a lot of designers use this method, where we just try and use the walls in his garage to put the film visually up in story order. Chris is he's written a draft of the script that's very readable, but he's usually working on third act usually, and he brings me in to help provide imagery for that journey. So I work in the garage, and he's supposed to be in his writing room writing, but he spends all his time in the garage bugging me. So this is his old garage, which is now, I mean, it's a lot nicer than that now. But it's actually a screening room now. I have to work in the other garages. But the way we worked is, I mean, often it's like, let's just try and tackle something. Let's try and tackle the Batmobile before we get into what is Batman Begins and what are we trying to say and, you know, what are we trying to do? Let's just get rid of something that we can enjoy as its own sort of singularity. And so the Batmobile we just modeled. There were actually no drawings of this. We just modeled it and modeled it. And he has an art background, so we'll do it together. And you know, and that is kind of this sort of joyous thing. And then he goes off and he starts writing and gives him some ideas. So when we got to Interstellar, you know, I'll just go to the first thing I read, or when I finished Interstellar, I read this, which is the Tesseract, the fifth dimensional object in the singularity that is built by
Not an easy thing to envisage, I imagine.
No, and it was like, well, I don't know how we're going to do that. And he was like, well, let's start with something again.
So he made you start with that, which is probably the most complex thing in the film.
Yeah, and you know, Chris is great because he loves physics. So it's like, well, you know, we know time is linear, is a fourth dimension. Fifth dimension is we can move through time, so objects you can go back and forth. And I mean, this took the entire film to design, but we started with that, and at least we tried to get rid of the bad ideas. We tried to get them off the table. We eventually ended up with this sort of objects have a time flow. So if you're moving in fourth dimension, this table moves with you, and it has a flow of colors in a line. And if you're a fifth dimensional being, you can jump between those. So we kind of had that, but we didn't know how that should look. So we eventually got to it, and I guess this is where our methodology sort of comes in, because we know we have to build enough of it so we can understand it and film it, and then VFX takes over. So we built the inner core of the Tesseract, and then it was a truly collaborative design, because I'd go to Paul Franklin, who runs DNEG, and say, this bookshelf needs to move on X, Y, Z, so I need a color stripping of those objects moving through time, and he could sort of produce that, and then we built it, and we literally printed it out and stuck it on plywood. And then if a window, we had to get light in there, so the only way to get light is to make that window move in time and the light move. So we had to create, so the journey of figuring out how to make it kind of made it much better, because it became this real object. And I love this set because it looks like an art installation.
It
looks
does.
like Gerhard Richter should have done it, so.
I mean, you said that he's often working out the third act as he brings you into the process. Do you think he needs you to come in that early so he can figure out that third act, whatever the film is?
Without a doubt. He wants underneath his story cards, he needs visual images where we might go. So it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle in that garage. So it's like, we could do this, we could do that. That needs to go on location. Maybe we build this. If we're going to burn something, we'll build it. The basic stuff. So it's a sort of puzzle, and we pull it down and put it back up, and it's like this sort of evolving thing. And no one else comes in for 3 months, maybe the DP, and we just try and figure out the film, and he puts it into the script, which I find is, for art department, is essential, because otherwise you get assistant directors, sorry if there's any assistant directors here, who say, well, it says there's a red door, where's the red door? In the script. It's like, well, it's like what I like about Chris's script is it tells you, it's like everything you need to know. So that's crucial. I mean, production design, let's talk about why we do this. So the house in Interstellar, Coop's house has to, in terms of story, he has to feel like something he has to give up. So you have to play it like there's no place like home, and you have to make an Americana image. And so
But was that a real house?
We built that.
You built that house completely?
Yeah, because we have to have the best landscape. It's America, and well, it was Canada, but has some fantastic landscapes. So we went to Calgary, and we often go off scouting, looking for places, and you go and speak to the farmers. It's like, if you wanted to build a house around here, what's your favorite spot? And so Rick the farmer took us out here and said, this is where I'd build a house. And it was like, yeah, you're right. That's where I'd build a house too. And then, of course, we had the corn, because they don't grow corn this far north. It's too close to the Rockies. So it was like, Rick, any chance you can plant 500 acres of corn for us? And Rick was like, well, I can give it a go. But I don't know, it might fail. And we're thinking, well, that's dangerous. So these are sort of, I guess what I'm trying to say is production design is like having the courage to make these kind of decisions and belief that you can grow 500 acres of corn, which we did, and it did grow. But we had we built into the set all these, if the corn grew too high, we'd have to lift the house so we could get the deck. If it was too low, we'd have to sink the house. So we had this we had it on blocks, and we knew that if we had to lift it with a crane, we'd have to adjust it. And so you sort of work in this it's a dangerous area to work in, and you're outside and you're exposed to weather. And the corn did fail, but the key piece of information Rick didn't tell us is failed corn is 6 foot, not 8 foot. And if it'd gone to 8 foot, would have had to lift the house. So anyway, that's...
Well, we wanted to talk about sort of how you develop an overall visual concept to in line with the story. And if we move on to Tenet, which is after First Man, so a little bit further on. So, I mean, Tenet's probably, I think, the most complicated script you ever read, from what you were telling me, and I know because I read it. I had to read it in 4 hours as well. I couldn't even go back and read it again. Yeah, here we go. So if we stop on that one, the opera house, the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a real opera house in Talent, isn't it? Now, when you read it and you started talking to Chris, you both decided to sort of pepper the film with this kind of brutalist architecture. So that is your sort of visual concept for, I suppose, the science fiction of Tenet, these turnstiles that reverse people and send them backwards and so forth.
Yeah.
But how on earth did you reach that idea of, right, let's explore the world of brutalist architecture, first of all?
Well, first of all, you read Tenet, and it's the only script I've read that you can't actually imagine, because it has so many time loops in it. You've got people moving in different time loops, and then you have the talisman, which is Neil, moving in a time loop that is sort of 7 layers down. So really, the reason, I mean, I love simplicity, and it was a spy film, essentially, so I figured if I could finally get to keep the image as simple as possible, and that would inform the turnstiles, that there were these heavy things, and they weren't light, it was this heavy mechanical object, because to turn yourself back, your entropy, inverse it, was incredibly hard work, and it felt like concrete seemed like a good way of doing it. And so that led to us trying to find the opera house. In fact, this is Talent, and we'd never... I mean, what we do is we get on planes, myself and Chris, and we go looking at things and rule them out a lot of the time. Like, well, we'd love to use the Barbican in London, but, it kind of is like too small. And then we came across Talent, and we came across the Lina Hall, which was the 1980s Soviet Olympic building. That I've never seen anything like it. And we knew we had to use it. And around the edge it was derelict at the time. We had to get it all working. It has this sort of circular door that lifts up in one go. And so the whole scene looks like it's being suspended. So as it's getting raided, we could close the doors and shut everyone in. And it just worked. So the theme, often I always push modernism and into Chris's world, just because I believe that they're so complex, these stories, that you need, the image for me has to be almost simple. And I don't want to, dare I say, basic or just clean.
But how, especially when you get a script like Tenet, but even some of the other ones that you've worked on, do you have a set method of how you approach a script at the beginning when you first get it, how you start breaking it down and working out what you need to do?
I usually take the big elements and put them on that wall. And I have a lot of books and we have a lot of research, and we're like, what would work? What are ideas? It can be photography, it could be sketches, and you sort of build a look, and then it's a big jigsaw puzzle, and it's just semi-random. You you find it. You have to go searching for it, and you have to try and empty your mind of all your preconceived loves in design. Just because you like something doesn't necessarily fit into the film, and you have to, And we know we're a spy genre, so we know we need to get across 7 countries, and we know we're going to spend our money on traveling the crew. So building sets is going to be, not that possible, because we need to go to locations and fix them up, because we spent all our money on moving the unit. So we went to India, Denmark, Tallinn, Italy, then LA, Palm Springs. I'm sure there's something else.
London, I think.
London, yeah. And so you build the look of the film through scale, but then you have to manage the imagery, the places and locations. So you have to make sure those locations fit into your story, and they don't. I guess we're trying to not jump the audience out of the movie. So if you're watching it, you need to be brought in, and you need to be engrossed in quite a tricky story without the scenery bumping you out. And so that's often why we try to lessen CGI. So the reality we're giving you is a fiction, but it's a reality you can believe, and you can believe that these places really exist and within that story. So we have to give you a fictional reality that you go away believing, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned research earlier, and I think if we flip back to First Man, which is just before Tenet, so obviously a reality-based story, how that, this is Damien Chazelle's First Man.
Yeah.
How do you approach something like that? I mean, on some level, it would seem easier than a film like Tenet, because the pre-existing materials are already there, but I'm sure that's not the case. So how do you research a film like First Man?
Well, how do I feel about research? This needed research, and we needed to go to NASA. We went to Houston for a few weeks, and I had to get educated on Apollo, Gemini, and the X-15, moon landing. So you have to do, research is critical here, mission control. So you have to sort of throw yourself into NASA. Whereas some films you use research as a guide, like a period film. Some people believe you have to be exact in a period film. I don't. I think you just use it as a guide. But research was critical here. Linus, the DP, brought in, this is 2017, so he brought in this LED screen, which kind of saved us. So, because NASA had IMAX footage of Earth orbit, moon orbit. They filmed everything, so we could project it. Because the problem with these screens and for VFX is they have to create the footage to put on them, and that takes a long time. So in a traditional film structure, there isn't the time. They need 18 weeks to produce footage of quality to put on these screens. So really to have it already there was marvelous. I mean, so we knew we could do Apollo. I mean, I knew early on we had to do miniatures. So, I knew we had to do miniatures. The studio were very against doing miniatures. But at that time in the art department, I had a lot of 3D printers. So I split the art department, and from day one, we started building the Saturn V. We started printing it. Because again, the 3D models of Saturn V all exist, so we can go straight into print. And we just started building miniatures until eventually production caught up and realized they needed miniatures, and then we were ready to go. So, I mean, the reason I'm telling you this is part of the art department too. You must always go with your gut and move in the right direction, regardless of what everyone says.
I think I've only seen First Man once when it first came out, and my overriding memory of it is them in the spacecraft and how it looks like it's almost about to fall apart. The kind of everything's rattling, and it's like literally being in a tin can, to sort of quote David Bowie. And it was that sort of something you had to get not just the structural nature of this spacecraft, but what it would be like to be inside that, what it felt like. Do you know what I mean? Your job is not just interpreting physics, mechanics, but also an atmosphere and a feeling, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I mean, Damien was very keen on making things true to scale. So when you got in Gemini, I remember we got Ryan into the Gemini capsule, and we've been playing, it's so tight in there. And we built the Gemini capsule per NASA, and he happened to be 2 inches taller than, I forget the astronaut, White, who did the first spacewalk. And so the door wouldn't close, So it was like, Jesus, Ryan, I've got to squish your head on this door.
You squished Ryan Gosling's head.
It was like, and it was like, we've got to get you in there, and you've got to feel uncomfortable. And it was horribly uncomfortable. I mean, if you sit in that thing. And then the problem with a capsule like that, as any DP would know, is like, how do you shoot that? Like, luckily, all the instrument boards, if we could take out a piece of instruments because they were quite large, then we could get a camera through. There were ways to get in there to film it. And the advantages of how small the Gemini capsule was is then you could put it in front of the LED screen, camera mount on it, and we could film the actual real thing as a miniature, which is like, it was so, you kind of, you go through a learning process. So without Interstellar, I couldn't have done the First Man. We used projectors on Interstellar, which was because the LED screens weren't good enough. I mean, it's boring, but they were 3.8 millimeter rather than 1.2, so the quality wasn't good enough. So projectors, I mean, everything you see in Interstellar, apart from the black hole, is projected outside the window. But again, the learning process of projectors, it didn't look right on Coop, so we then knew we had to get a 2K projector and project that same image for the reflections on his helmet. So you kind of, no one film is ever the same, so you sort of gain knowledge on how things can be done. Yeah.
I mean, around the time you were doing First Man, you were also doing The Greatest Showman, and I guess your career has moved in an interesting direction in this sort of, for want of a better word, fantasy compared to the kind of reality of something like First Man. So The Greatest Showman, then obviously Wonka, and now you've got Wicked, the adaptation of the stage musical coming up. So how did you make that move? Was that like a deliberate ploy to try something radically different to what you'd done with Chris and obviously with Damien Chazelle and so on?
Michael, weirdly, I've been talking to Michael, the director of Great Showman, for years. And he suddenly called me at the end of Dunkirk and said, I've got the money to do it, and we got Hugh Jackman on board, and we're going to make it in New York, and I live in New York. It was like, yeah. And then I went along to off-Broadway read-through of The Great Showman, where they were playing and singing the entire film. Something I don't like musical theater. I don't like theater. I find it doesn't throw me into a story. Anyway, I sat around this table, and the music was just incredible. And Justin broke the piano. It was just moving. And it was like, oh, we have to make this. And it kind of opened a door for me that I didn't realize ever existed. Like, I'd been in these kind of films, and suddenly, I mean, actually another designer said to me, the reason he does Marvel films and he uses so much CGI is because he can't do the fantasy he doesn't know a way to achieve the kind of fantasy that he needs. And so it was very interesting to then go to Greatest Showman, which isn't a Marvel film, but we could do some fantastical things. And then Wonka, which was like, well, can we do fantasy practically? You know, can we do it? I mean, of course, there's CGI in every film, but can we do it? Can we do as much practically as possible? And then that led to Wicked, which was, you know, Oz. It's the alternative story to The Wizard of Oz. So you have to make Oz, and then can we do as much practically? Because, you know, it occurred to me that if we push into CGI, I don't emotionally connect with it. So I have to try and make as much practically as possible. And so I would, you know, I think Wicked, which we finished last year, both films, it's truly been a new door has opened, and it was I didn't expect that at this stage in my career, and like I just love it. Like Wicked rates with Interstellar. My favorite films were Prestige, Interstellar, now Wicked. So yeah, I mean, we can look at.
Well, let's bring up Wonka first of all before
Yeah.
we get on to. And by the way, as was mentioned at the beginning, when any images of Wicked come up, please do not take pictures of them, because I guess these guys are the first to see them, or a lot of people, you know, in the public realm.
Yeah.
So, but let's pull up Wonka first of all.
Oh, yeah.
And
That was the real plane in Tenet.
Of course, because he's going to crash a real plane, isn't he?
Well, Chris is like, why don't we just get a real plane? I mean, he's not wrong. You know, this is the kind of thing you deal with, Chris. Like, the set's not big enough. We're going to have to paint a forced perspective and a backing in a room on location in Tallinn. And you say to Chris, well, you've got to hold your camera in one position, and then you paint the room and extend it, because he won't use green screen. So anyway, Wonka.
So this is Wonka. So we wanted to talk in terms of set design, like the principles of set design, and how you take a practical, functional space and sort of build on that. So maybe if you talk us through this space.
Yeah,
this is like Wonka Town. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, it's the chocolatiers. It's the center of chocolate in a fictional European city that, you know, it's supposed to be this sort of former wondrous place that Wonka brings life back to. And so it was really, for us, it was the best of Europe. And, you know, we went to Belgium. You go and scout, it's like we can, you know, often it's like, well, to build a back lot is expensive, and, you know, do you want to put your money in that, or do you want to go on location and try and build it out of several town squares? But this is just after COVID. COVID still had restrictions, so it was dangerous going anywhere.
So is this Leavesden?
This is Leavesden.
Yeah, Leavesden in
this is
Watford.
the back lot where the Harry Potter sets, where there's a big sort of pad. So the other thing about musicals is we have huge dance numbers. So, and that means dance numbers are done in one take, again and again and again. So you have to control it. So back lots are quite traditional for musicals. So we decided to build this, and you know, and then this was my illustrator Gerard's digital top up. So we went from, you know, that was the concept design. So then we would build as much as we can. So I knew I need to get to 25 feet so I could get in camera for most shots. And then I wanted to build the interior of the gallery's gourmet, which is this, that could lead out into the back lot, so we could get it as one journey, which again in a musical is important because the transition pieces are more difficult. So we built a tent, and then we built the galleries, and we went out into the back lot, and it all flows as one. So that's the back lot within the back lot. And so, but the sort of design theory was it was the best, the most wondrous place in Europe you can imagine. So, you know, we linked Georgian London with Milan, you know, with Belgium and Prague. You know, so we had a lot of fun, like doing the best of Europe. Again, practical techniques, that is a painted backing in the background there. So
all the kind of things we see through the arch are just painted images.
An old trick that we learned with Chris is you just put arches, deep arches, and you take the focus off the paint. And so if you cross the arch line, then you have to go into CG. But it will hold up. You use the darkness of the foreground to push the backing away. And these are not new techniques. They've been doing them for 120 years. So, I mean, so you just have to get yourself a good scenic.
Do you prefer working on a backlot where you can control everything, or is there a certain fun in taking a pre-existing location, let's say like you were working in this building, for example, and building on that? Or is it just dependent on the story?
It just depends on the story. And also, musicals, they need backlots. You've got huge dance crews, and you have to soften the ground because their feet bleed by the end of the day. So, it's very important to. Well, here's another part of design. You have to look at who you're working with and the crew you're working with and understand their limitations of whether they can handle going out to sea on Dunkirk. So, like, can your crew, are they up for getting on ships, wherever Dunkirk is, there? That was in the inland sea. That's a set built in the inland sea on a 35-foot scaffolding to the seabed with Cillian Murphy on it. So and you've got to work off barges, and it's rough weather, and it's not pleasant. And are you with those people who are okay with that? And do you have the construction support who can do that? So
you had divers basically go in and build a scaffolding unit underneath.
Underwater riggers, they're called.
Which is that's an insane idea.
Yeah, but Chris won't do it any other way. So it's like we had an armada of barges to protect it to act as a breakwater, and it was very unpleasant. But and building this pier, rebuilding the mole.
Well, that's a key thing for Dunkirk. It's probably something you should come into to get into, because the mole is an incredible piece of construction, and it features significantly, of course, in the film. So how on earth did you go about doing that?
The importance of the mole, it was a white wood structure that stretched 1 kilometer out to sea, and the tide was 23 foot, so that's how the British Army escaped. It was on this 7.5 foot wide white structure that went to nowhere, and visually that was an important look to get the sort of the desperation of the road to nowhere. And Luftwaffe couldn't hit it because it was only 7.5 feet wide. So, we built this thing on a 23-foot tide. We had the engineers from the port, and I brought in one of my construction guys from America called Guy, and he's a great engineer, and they figured out that we could pre-build this structure, and then we'd bolt it. We'd do a section at low tide and another section at high tide. So, we were trying to get across. We were trying to build it as we went. Dunkirk we shot in Dunkirk because we had to, because we have to respect the event. The Dunkirk city would just, being on a location, if you can get the support of the city, it makes your life significantly better. So you need to do the time with the people in these locations. It's just like Rick the farmer. You need to tell him what you're doing, and he becomes part of your memories as well, and that's significant to me. Like the building of the mole was kind of a magical thing, just as growing the corn.
I think there's the picture of them all on the mole a bit further on.
Oh yeah, there.
No, isn't there another one with the soldiers on it?
Oh yeah, maybe that's probably before.
Right at the end, I think.
I think it's
there. That one.
Yeah,
that's almost one of the key images that we see from that film.
Yeah.
But you've got to know that it can support all those men as well. I mean, that's a huge construction challenge. I mean, that's one thing I wanted to ask is, from your standpoint as a production designer, how does it work collaborating with the art department, who are probably there creating these sort of visions on paper, in drafts and drawings, to then work with the construction team? who are actually going to build it. I mean, that's quite, you're there in the middle. I guess you're the bridge almost, or the kind of vessel in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, construction for me, the most important department I have, because without them, you can talk and draw what you want, but you've got to build it. You know, so they are, and if you can get them on side, they will do anything for you. They're like salt of the earth people. So the art department is about like talking to them and listening to them, doing the drawings and adjusting to their advice. And then you go out and these guys, the guys with you, they're strong and they build stuff, and it's you can do anything with good construction. And you know, I think Wicked, I had the best construction crew I've ever had. But your art department has to produce information, not only for the other departments and for production, but for construction and set, deck, and props. I like to run special effects in my department. Like, we need to be together because a lot of things, I mean, not for fire and smoke and the usual effects, but if we have rigs, like turning rigs, or we have flying miniatures on, all the planes are flying miniatures. The Heinkel's are 17-foot wide flying miniatures. So they're made by special effects, so we have to be one department to achieve this. So,
I mean, in terms of sort of a practical approach, do you favor sort of blueprints or computer-aided work? I think you mentioned before AI is now obviously a huge topic at the moment, but that's something you're probably using as well?
I mean, I think we use new technology for old techniques. So, for instance, in the early 90s when Photoshop came along, it was like, wow, got to learn that. And then when 3D programs, Maya, Rhino, Modo came in, it was like, I got to learn that. That's because you can, if you have a space mouse, it can move like your head can move around an object, so you can spin and rotate. Once you have your thing, it's like, oh, I can see it. The problem with those programs is you couldn't get anything out of that screen. So then 3D printing came in, so we could then transfer it to physical, which means you can be less precious about design, because you can print models and you say, that doesn't wrong, throw it away, print it again until you find something. So, and AI's come in now, which is like sort of, it's not as precise, but it can give you all, I guess I'd go back to when your head is imagining something and you're doing it. Now with Midjourney, you can keep moving 60 images at a time, and you can like discover things, which I love. But you can't, they come out as 2D near kind of images. Pretty good sometimes, but then, I mean, I sometimes look at it and think, okay, now I need an old school art director who can translate what used to be a sketch. I need a old school art director who can go from 2D to 3D, and the art direction has now become, I think, significantly more important, because 3D gave you, all of that information that perhaps an old school art director had to figure out. But with AI, the 3D was slow, so you didn't necessarily get to the right answer, and so AI, you can get rid of all the no's to find a yes, if that makes sense. You can get rid of all your first ideas that are usually not very good. So.
Well, let's bring up Wicked, I think, and the Shiz University, because you can talk us through that, because that's sort of built on this water tank, and maybe you can just take us through the process of that. Again, just a reminder, these are where you put your camera phones away.
Yeah, it's funny you should ask that. Everyone, there's no general chat. There are general forums about it with the Art Directors Guild, and people do talk about it, but everyone is individually finding. I don't see it. I mean, I don't know where it will go in terms of its danger. I don't see it as affecting art department. I see it as another tool, just like every other technology. I think it's a bigger sea change. I think it's more like a silent to sound, but I see it as another tool. And no matter what we do in AI, I'm still going to illustrate it, and I'm going to put it in Unreal Engine. I'm going to discover it. Then I'm going to draft it and I'm going to build it, because that's the way I want to work. Now, other people might say I'm just going to do everything AI, but that is our business, is There's no one way to do anything, and I truly believe it's going to change people's jobs. Illustrators are going to have to be Unreal Engine experts. If any of you know what that, you probably know about it. They're going to have to work in moving set previs. Like Unreal is the perfect example of that. You just have to change. You have to learn and change. I don't know about VFX in terms of, obviously when you use AI with Photoshop, it's like, in terms of comp, it's like incredibly quick, and I think it's going to change the VFX world. It's not going to change imagination, so I think jobs are going to change. What it also means is art directors have to now become more like old school art directors. And so I don't know how it's going to affect us. It's going to affect us, but we have to move with it, not against it, as artists. In terms of a bigger picture, in terms of a world picture, I understand the fears. Right now it's here and it's not going away. So, yeah. I could be wrong. So.
There's a question near the back. I think I saw a hand up just there with a baseball cap.
Hi, Nathan. It's Mario.
Hey, Mario.
What is the process that leads to a determination of how much CGI is going to be used in a particular scene? Do you prepare the finished product first and then determine what to build in it and what to leave in CGI, or vice versa?
I do them in conjunction. So I have my illustrators who, with Unreal Engine, you can build the whole thing and light it. And then the draftsman, we go to a height that we can build. As you go higher, it's harder, slower, more expensive to build. So you go over 35 feet, it becomes very difficult. So if I can get a majority of shots in camera, I guess our techniques, or Chris's techniques are, if you don't put any blue screen up, then you can edit you can edit without having to do with VFX, because the blue screen isn't there. So how do you get to a no blue screen environment? It means you have to get in camera, which is a height issue. And sometimes if someone's close up, you're going to go off it. But you singularly know that you have to rotoscope that moment. So usually it's a judgment call. And it's also money. So often we have to go to the VFX department and say, give us some of your money. But if you have a good VFX supervisor, he knows that if we can build it and we can light it, then he knows what it looks like. So that means he's not making up. He has material reference, he has architectural reference, he has lighting reference, and it's going to look better. So it's a sort of case by case. Now, like David Fincher doesn't agree with that. His designer will be like, I'm going to build a low wall and the rest is going to be CG. That's what I'm sort of saying. Design is an opinion, But I would say if you look at Nolan films, you'd be hard pushed to see where the CGI is, right? Because there's lots in there. So it's like we're not giving you the traditional point of where it might be. You'll see it in Wonka and you'll see it in Wicked because it's just a more traditional matte line. But Chris, the other problem he has is he uses IMAX. He doesn't do a DI. So he has to get the native, he has to get it in camera. He loses the quality that he loves if he doesn't get it in camera. And that's essential to him. So he makes everyone do it for real. So
yeah, there's there's lots now. Let's go with the gentleman with his hand up. That's it, just there.
Thank you. Once again, thank you for coming here, both of you. It's a great honor and a learning experience for us. If I may go back to basics, when you are building a film set from scratch on a sound stage, what happens the first time you meet the art director? What do you give him? Artist's impressions or what? I have a second question. Have you been invited to go and see our Popeye village?
Yes, the first time. The second question first. Yes, I think when I scouted here, they mentioned the Popeye village. I don't think we saw it because it didn't have much to do with the Little Mermaid. The first question is, the art team works with me, so we'll work with, usually we try and put a lookbook together before anyone starts. Like, we take the visual version of the film, which is made up of locations and ideas and sketches and illustrations, and then I'll build it into a book. And that, when we move to, say, London, we hire the art direction team. We take that book and we put it back on the wall, and we discuss how we're going to make everything. The art director, construction manager, special effects, props, set decorator, we all sit around that wall and go, how are we going to do that? And how are we going to make that puppeteered head, or how can we do that? And we have very endless meetings of how, just within the art department. So, the art department at this scale is its own film unit almost. So, and then we decide where to build it. We then go with locations. We go to backlots, because often the backlots are full. So you go to fields, and we talk about how we're going to achieve this. We're our own production, in a sense. And before all the department heads even come and look. And then once we sort of figured out the plan, I know you were talking about a soundstage, but art direction I don't think is as simple as that. The stage is actually the simple one. We just have to find a soundstage big enough. Because you've got the lighting, we've got at least 10 foot we have to allow. The stages are never high enough. So we need bigger sound stages, and now sound stages are built, every sound stage is equal to each other one, whereas if you look at the history of sound stages, MGM built them all different sizes because it depended on what you needed to make. So back to your question, the art directors are key in becoming the managers and translating those images artistically into the set, and that means we've got to work with scenics. So I go with each art director doing each set. We divide up the sets. I go around the construction shops every day, and they're saying, okay, we've got these kind of finishes, let's talk about this. We go to the scenics saying, okay, we can't afford to make tiles with the plasterers, they're too busy, can we scenic it? So it's a very fluid machine of craftsmen. And then you go to the set dressing workshops, and they're saying, we have to build that piece of furniture because it has to open and things have to fly out of it. And, so it's an endless discussion. We walk miles every day. So once we have the teams on, I find it so exciting going around the workshops because you've got all these creative people making things, and you have to time with the art directors when to get to something to adjust it before it gets built. So everything is moving. So you have all these ships going, and you have to just quickly, you have to adjust them like tuning a piano in some way. So, and you have to have a sort of inert understanding of when to look at something. Because once it's built, my belief is you never go backwards. You don't have time to go backwards. You've got to go forwards. And so you have to catch things. And so it's sort of this sort of very, a director's job is more complicated because he's doing it with 100 ships. But it's definitely something I have a love of it, so I don't find it stressful. My wife also works with me, who's here. She's the concept designer.
She has a question. I know you've been burning to ask this. I really want to know what this question is. Do you want to wait for the microphone and then...
Yeah, what time is lunch?
Yeah. Just hang on. There we go.
Can you just run us through really quickly? I don't think it's obvious what is a miniature, what you built, and what you put in. So if you could run quickly through, particularly, yes, and Interstellar, that's crazy. Can you go back to that? That actually rocked. If you can just quickly, not too long, go like real rocked, dump this in the water.
Yeah, let's go in.
Okay.
Let's talk about this. Ranger, like design-wise, how can I make you believe Ranger is full size in LA, 80% because 80% is only for Iceland in the water. We built it and shipped it. 80% because it wouldn't fit on a 747 cargo ship at 100%, so you go to 80%. That causes you all kinds of on and off problems. That's the 80% in Iceland being loaded. So we land it with hydraulic gear so we can get the shot. We knew that we needed to do as much as possible in the endless water. That's an endless wash that we happened to find in Iceland. We knew we had to do everything because the wave was CG, so you've got to get everything else practically. That's the Ranger set on Stage 27 MGM. So zero G, so that's the interior. So again, Kubrick sort of invented it. You put them on wires and you shoot this way. You can't see the wires, so they're floating towards you. Then you flip it the other way to get the reverse. So it was on a hydraulic platform that went, then you turn it around and do all the other stuff. The reverse is TARS. There's my art room. You can see it's in story order. That's Chris. That's special. That's Mario special effects. This is TARS because once we came up with a design for a robot, which was difficult. I'm going to go back to the Ranger. The reason the Ranger, to me, works is because we put it into NASA shuttle colors, so you accept it rather than challenge it because it's a crazy shape. So because we put NASA shuttle heat tiles and the white and the windows, I feel like I could get the audience to engage that it could exist. And so that was key, learning that. And that came from going to NASA. TARS is great because, humanoid robots, dustbin robots, we had to come up with something.
It's like a series of blocks, isn't it?
It's a series of blocks. And then Chris, because of his mathematics, spent a week looking at how he could multiply the blocks to get movement. So there's TARS. That's really TARS. That's everything in that shot is real. In Iceland, Anne Hathaway's suit was leaking, so that was a problem. And so you have a special effects guy behind TARS moving it. They had to put a hydraulic unit in it, and then VFX took him out rather than putting in TARS. That's in Iceland. That's the real exterior set we built into a glacier in Iceland. You just learn crazy things. The minute the wood touches the ice, it melts. So you're endlessly building the set. It's a never-ending thing. That's on a soundstage in LA. It's not a soundstage. It's an ice freezer. Try and get the breath for when Dr. Mann, when we open. It's all hydraulic. It's all weird. Design-wise, the look of it comes really from a United plane trip me and Chris took on the galley. We realized that if we got enough galley fronts off the drawers, we could cover the whole thing in it. We realized the space is storage. You've got to take everything with you, so you have to store everything. So we talked about the Tesseract. That is the endurance. So the interior sets, we built on this sort of giant seesaw with two hydraulics. So when you were in any particular pod, you could look up and see it curve out. And so we just sort of built this hydraulic seesaw with the set on it. Again, you run into problems because you realize the weight load can cause you hydraulic problems. I won't tell you what happened. Paul Franklin, brilliant piece of VFX, probably the best. The excretion disk around the black hole and the physics of that were truly spectacular. We talked about that. That's a real flying Spitfire. Most of the planes were miniature because they didn't exist, like the Heinkel, wherever that is. Well, this is the Rogaland that we found in, part of my job was going to find ships around Europe, so that came out of Norway, Stavanger. They painted it white, these old fellas who rang the museum and sailed it 1,000 miles down.
So what you did on Dunkirk was insane, literally going around and finding these old destroyers and making them work.
Yeah, and then when we couldn't get the scale right, we then built scaled-down guns on the Dutch ships. So So from a distance, it would look bigger than it was because the guns are only this big, and then we had to cover. So we put miniature elements on the ship, so when it came past, it looked bigger than it was, and we put it half the distance, if that makes sense. So you use it as a fake miniature. Well, we call them big-atures. So that's a painted, on metal, a ship, 120 foot. We painted a wrecked ship on a singular. That's a cutout of a ship. And then again, you use foreground elements to throw it away. When that goes down, that's the sinking of the hospital ship. So we had men swimming in the foreground, and that's a half-scale hospital ship when it was sinking that we lowered with cranes to try and get that effect. This is what we call the Frankenhull in LA, which is a mixture of all the ships we had. And so it looks terrible from this angle, but when you went up close, we forced all the shots we need of the sinking ship because that rotates into the water. So you could get specific shots Chris needed for the sinking of several ships. So as the men, you could stack it up, so you just shrink and push forward all the background elements. So you do, third size, third distance, half size, half distance. So that's why it's the Frankenhull. Only work from certain shots. Mission control, that's the X-15. We talked a bit about this is the moon, this was great, because I was in Atlanta, Georgia, thinking, how are we going to do the moon? It's full of trees, Atlanta. And, usual suspects were like, oh, we just put it in the parking lot. It's like, no, that's not going to work. And then location said, well, there is this white quarry. And it was like, really? You have a white quarry? So we went down there, and the people who ran it, that's what the joy of the sort of local community is. The people who ran it were like, yeah, we'll make the moon. We'll make the Sea of Tranquility for you. So they cleared 5 acres, and we had maps of the Sea of Tranquility. It's like, well, we need a crater here. And they had big digger. They were just, again, it was like that sort of local spirit, which was good. That's miniature. We talked about that. That's the turnstile, which I love. I spend a lot of my time jumping between the two and walking back.
Going backwards, obviously.
Yeah. That's the blast chamber for the end of the film. That's a stage build. Anyway, a lot of design elements in that one. Did we talk about the backing? A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. The real plane we did.
The real plane, we built the building to crash into. That's it was in a plane graveyard, so we faked the engines again, and because the engines are out of it, and towed it in. We talked about all of that.
Well, should we see if there's any more final questions as we're
sorry.
we're hitting time? There's one just there, gentleman there, and we'll make this the final question.
Can you speak a little bit about your process with the DOPs you've worked with, and what changes between them? And maybe I'd be most curious about, across Nolan's films, you worked with 2 different DOPs, and did anything in that arrangement change when the DOP changed, or is your process more or less the same?
It's kind of the same. They're in early with us, and often both with Wally and Hoyter, they would they have their own process and their own these are images, this is the kind of lighting, and then often with them we build something to test it. It's like, well, let's test it, see how that looks, and so they're integral in the process. And I also need to know where they need light, and you're with them all the time, because if we're building a back lot, most DPs want it north-facing, but it's like, let's go and discuss that. And often we have a model, and we're like, let's go out to location, should we build it here? So it's a continual, color, lighting, imagery, what is the feeling? Like this, for instance, if I put windows down the side and there's no top light, you're going to be okay with it, so, because it's barrel vaulted, top light here is very hard to hide. Brendan, who I've worked with on Behind Enemy Lines over there, is a DP, so he knows me well, but we spend all our time together. So we go scouting. It's just, they're part of it, and they come, often, Hoyter will come with images and put them on our room, visual room, okay, something like this. Wally, I love, because he always turned the lights off, and it was always very dark. So he was always darker. So you know, so I mean, it's very, again, it's fluid. They are part of all of this. So with the costume designer too. So, I mean, those are the creative and special effects just to a lesser point because it's not it is creative, but it's not creative at that level, if that makes sense.
Amazing. Nathan, thank you so much. If we could join me in thanking our guest.
Thanks.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks for coming.